Mr. President, distinguished ministers, briefers, ambassadors, and those watching us online. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all sides of the world. It is an honor to welcome you to this high-level Security Council area formal meeting organized by Estonia and co-sponsored by Afghanistan, Finland, Germany, Indonesia, Norway and Qatar. We are here today to discuss the peace process in Afghanistan, in particular how this Council and the international community can further support Afghanistan in this process and ensure peace and stability for post-war Afghanistan. We are at crossroads. It has been 9 months since the agreements in Doha and Kabul were signed. And this is not a long period considering that establishing a sustainable political settlement certainly requires our patience. However, it is highly disappointing that after these 9 months already, a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire has still not been achieved. On the contrary, the security situation has worsened. The people of Afghanistan yearn for peace, so we are also here today to call on all parties to the negotiations to show good faith and seize this historic moment to bring about a better future for the people. Let me now briefly introduce the order of today's meeting. We have 27 speakers today, including 3 briefers. There will be a keynote speech by His Excellency Mohammad Ashraf, President of Afghanistan, who will be introduced by His Excellency Mohammad Atmar, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan. Thereafter, we will hear statements by co-sponsors and our distinguished briefers. After them, I will give the floor to the current and incoming Council members. And finally, there will be a short session of comments and replies by the representative of Afghanistan and by briefers. We will post the full version of your statement online, and please be so kind and send it to the email you are seeing on the screen. All other member states are welcome to send their written statements and will be included them in the compilation of statements. Today's meeting will be streamed live and open to public via YouTube, Facebook and United Nations Web TV. And you will also find a webcast link on the website and social media platforms of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia and the Estonian Permanent Representation to the UN. The recording will remain publicly accessible after the event. And now let me proceed by giving the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mohammad Atmar, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan, for introductory remarks. Please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Salam alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Excellencies, colleagues, and dear friends. First, thank you, Excellency Minister Rin Salo, for the kind introduction and your opening remarks. Second, I would very much like to thank Estonia, Germany, Indonesia, Finland, Norway, and Qatar for co-organizing today's area formula along with Afghanistan. It is exceedingly important for Afghanistan to have the Security Council consider the situation in our country at 2 area formula meetings in 1 year. First one was a meeting on women and the Afghan peace process. And this meeting is on peace in Afghanistan and what the UN Security Council can do to support it. This is a true testament to the genuine support of the international community, to the people and government of Afghanistan in our quest for a sustainable peace. It also represents a growing recognition by the international community that terrorism is the common enemy of all of us, that the most effective strategy to secure our people against the threat of terrorism is a lasting peace in Afghanistan, and that a lasting peace can only be sustained by an end state that is determined by the free will of the Afghan people and the preservation and advancement of their political, democratic, human rights, women's rights, and the socio-economic achievements of the past 19 years. Further, please allow me to congratulate St. Vincent and the Grenadines for their successful presidency of the Council during the month of November, and wish South Africa the best of luck during their presidency in December. Please also allow me to congratulate the incoming members of the Security Council, India, Ireland, Kenya, Mexico, and Norway. Afghanistan will be counting on your support, and you can count on ours. I would also like to seize this opportunity to extend our deep gratitude to Germany and Indonesia for their diligent and successful stewardship of the pen of the Afghanistan file. We highly value the collaborative spirit and the deep partnership we have formed with you through your tireless efforts. We commend you for garnering unanimous support for the extension of UNAMA's mandate and the Council's continuously strong support to Afghanistan, exemplified through press statements and resolutions. Afghanistan greatly commends the willingness and assumption of responsibility of the Afghanistan file by Norway and Estonia through their upcoming roles as co-pen holders. We look forward to working closely with both of you and wish to assure you of our full support and cooperation. Afghanistan also thanks Ambassador Jayani for his successful chairmanship of the 1988 Sanction Committee. We look forward to continuing to work with the Security Council in ensuring that sanctions are effectively implemented to contribute to the attainment of a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Afghanistan. The United Nations and its member states have provided invaluable support to the people and government of Afghanistan. The unanimous support of the Security Council has been instrumental to the gains achieved in the past 19 years. The support and efforts of all our friends and allies have furthermore greatly contributed to the start of the peace process. The importance of this partnership between Afghanistan and the international community for our shared security and prosperity can be best explained by our President. Dear colleagues and excellencies, without further ado, it is a great honor to introduce His Excellency Dr. Ashraf Rani, the President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, to deliver the keynote address. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. Reinslow, the Foreign Minister of Estonia, Sheikh Mohammad Al-Thani, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of the State of Qatar, Mr. Mas, Foreign Minister of Germany, Haavisto, Foreign Minister of Finland, Minister Atmar, Her Excellencies Eriksson and Marsudi, the Foreign Ministers of Norway and Indonesia, distinguished members of the UN Security Council, distinguished briefers, Special Representative of Secretary General Alliance, Ms. Gilani, Ms. Miller, ladies and gentlemen, and friends of Afghanistan, Ambassador Raz. As Minister Atmar has thanked everyone in detail, I will not repeat that and focus directly on my remarks. Today's ARIA Formula meeting on the peace process in Afghanistan shows once again Council's reaffirmation of its strong commitment to ensuring Afghanistan achieves peace and stability. Afghanistan has been on the front lines of the global threat of terrorism. Together, we have fought to defeat terrorism in the region, and with it, the threat that emanates from it across the globe. So too, the fight for peace is something we can only achieve if we all stand together. Peace is the priority of the Afghan people and the focus of my presidency. In February 2018, I made an unconditional offer to the Taliban, introducing the urgency of peace into the national and international dialogue. The Afghan people had not dared think of peace as a possibility until the unprecedented three-day ceasefire of June 2018. In 2019, the Loya on Peace created a framework and a mandate for negotiations. In this August, we hosted another Loya which allowed our people decide the future of the 400 contested Taliban prisoners. Over the past 2 years, Afghans have created a national consensus on the need to achieve an enduring peace via a political settlement with the Taliban, a peace that is in line with the values of our Constitution and with the UN Declaration of Human Rights. We have shown commitment, courage, and conviction, but we have also come to understand that peace will cost us. We've maintained our defensive positions on the battlefield, even in the face of a surge in violence against our people since February 2020. We agreed to the release of over 5,500 Taliban prisoners, most of them guilty of serious crimes against humanity. We have made sacrifices over and over again. There is not a single home, Afghan home, which has not felt the pain of loss. Yet our negotiating team remains steadfast in their commitment to talks in Doha, where the Taliban have insisted on beginning with divisive issues first. In light of these developments, today's conversation could not be more timely. Together with our international partners and friends, we've paid a heavy cost for peace and taken serious risks, but we've seen, unfortunately, no dividends yet. For dividends to actualize, the process needs certainty and predictability from our partners and allies. Over the course of our 20 years journey out of war, the Security Council has been a constant source of stable support to Afghanistan. I would like to thank each one of you for your continuity of attention, effort, and clarity and consistency of resolutions that you've passed. Today, the international community has reached an agreed upon end state for a political settlement in Afghanistan. That is, a sovereign, unified, democratic Afghanistan at peace with itself, the region, and the world, capable of preserving and expanding the gains of the past 2 decades. The Security Council, in articulating, reaffirming, and emphasizing its commitment to this end state long before the rest of us as an international community were able to articulate it. This is evidenced in the many resolutions that this council has passed since the Taliban regime was ousted in 2001. The Security Council resolutions have reaffirmed strong commitment to the independence, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of Afghanistan, stressed the inalienable right of the Afghan people to freely determine our own political future, pledged determination in helping the Afghan people end the conflict, promote national reconciliation, lasting peace, stability, and respect for human rights, as well as ensure that Afghanistan is never again used as a base and launching ground for terrorism. And reiterated international community's support to a sovereign, independent, and unified Afghanistan, in support to our national defense and security forces and our shared fight against terrorism. Consistency in resolutions has not only been important in reaffirming our rights, values, and goals for an end state, but also clearly set boundaries and established a precedent for what absolutely is and is not acceptable for Afghanistan. That the sole legitimate government of Afghanistan is the Islamic Republic, and that an Islamic emirate is not recognized by the UN, and the UN does not support the restoration of an Islamic emirate. The Security Council has done another service for the international community in identifying threats. These are threats which emanate from the region and often manifest themselves in Afghanistan due to the conflict, but which equally threaten the security of all countries worldwide. Those include the threat of narcotics and arms trafficking, criminality, transnational crime, and terrorism. In identifying these threats, you've also created mechanisms to curb them by placing a robust sanctions regime on the Taliban and associated terrorist organizations and drug dealers, including sanctions against their ill-begotten property. The Security Council was also the critical platform in creating the required international consensus around the deployment of international forces to Afghanistan. First, by authorizing the ISAF mission, then the ISAF and Enduring Freedom missions, then resolute support in 2014 based on our bilateral security agreement and strategic partnership and a strategic partnership agreement with the United States and NATO. The status of forces agreement with NATO, to be more exact. The critical mission of international forces now to train, advise, and assist the Afghan national defense and security forces as we continue to grow and mature into a self-reliant force capable of taking control of 100% of operations. Today, our security forces at the helm of 98% of all operations conducted against terrorist forces. I thank our National Security Advisor, Dr. Mohammad, and our other colleagues for this brilliant job. We ask the Council to continue to place importance on supporting our Afghanistan's national defense and security forces. I also thank you for sharing our vision of a sustainable peace via political settlement with the condition that women's rights and human rights are protected. The Security Council recognized the joint declaration we signed with the United States and NATO on February 29th, as well as the US-Taliban agreement signed also at this time. But these agreements are starting points, not end points. We thank you for your commitment to the principles of a sustainable, inclusive peace, one that includes women and minorities and adheres to international values of human rights and justice, one that builds on our gains of the past 20 years and one that carries the promise of prosperity for all Afghans. This type of real peace takes time. It takes commitment. It takes continuity. We thank you for that. Your consistency in support and long-term adherence to stated goals and principles over the past 20 years. What is this allowed us to achieve in Afghanistan? Afghanistan's story is often told via the international media as a culmination of failures, yours and ours. But there's always another side to the coin. The amount of progress and growth that has taken place in the country over the past several years has been nothing short of a generational transformation, one that has positively impacted women and youth more than any other segment of the society. Today, women make up 50% of our rural development councils across all 34 provinces of Afghanistan, a benchmark we set for ourselves, which no one thought possible. I would not dare to tell the women who sits on her local council in a village in Herat or Paktia, that she has failed. Women occupy 28% of seats in parliament, a higher percentage than in the United States. 53% of our industrial workers are women. 37% of students in primary school are girls. Women's literacy rates have doubled in the past 20 years. We have women in the cabinet, women as deputy ministers, women in our police and army. These numbers are steadily increasing. I've met young women who've gotten up from their hospital beds after being injured in a Taliban attack at their university and gone back to class, full of courage and conviction. I would not dare to tell her that she's failed. Can anyone judge our capable permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Rice, to be a failure, or tell her generation to go back to illiteracy and not work? Tomorrow, the National Statistics and Information Authority for Afghanistan will release its annual survey, population survey. It shows us that 48.5% our population is under age of 15, and fully 74% of the population is under age of 30. Imagine, almost half of our entire population has been born and raised in a young democracy, one that embraces freedom of expression, electoral democracy, equality, and possibility. We have made efforts across the board to reflect the youthful reality of our country and those who hold decision-making powers in the whole of government. People speak of a new Afghanistan emerging over the past decade. What has emerged with it is an entirely new set of expectations from our citizens. What has emerged with it is a vibrant grassroots civil society across the provinces, hundreds of voluntary associations across Afghanistan and in each province, individuals and communities actively participating in our democratic give and take. Thus, it should be no surprise to you that today only about 3 to 4% of the population still is any sympathy left for the Taliban. I would not dare to tell you, our partners, that we together have failed the Afghan people over these past 20 years. We have to confront hard questions to achieve peace. We've had failures along the way, but they do not cancel out the successes we've had, the progress we've made. If we stop now, then we will have failed. And failure is an option that none of us here around this table can afford, because it is a joint journey we've started together, our shared investment, and now our shared achievement. Despite progress, threats still loom large, and they too are evolving, growing and progressing, thriving from the continued violence. The threat of terrorism has not been eliminated. As recently as May of this year, the UN issued a report providing evidence that despite assurances from the Taliban to the United States, Al-Qaeda is still present and active in Afghanistan, harbored by the Taliban. Drug production is changed from opium and heroin now to amphetamine, threatening every child in Afghanistan, in the region, and in the world. Violence is continuously used without any restraint, and radicalism is not contained. Though the latest figures from our statistics office show that poverty has declined 4% during the last 4 years, Afghanistan is still a fundamentally poor and food insecure country. Furthermore, the peace process has not resulted in the hope for ceasefire. The process has been productive in demonstrating to the Taliban that they are facing a united negotiating team of the Islamic Republic in discussions and an Afghanistan National Defense and Security Force capable of defeating them in the battlefield in Helmand, Kandahar, and all other provinces of the country. In light of these realities, I want to ask for your support, not for anything new, but for the same continuity and consistency in the support you have steadfastly given Afghanistan over the past 20 years. Now more than ever, in our recent history, your support guided by principles of the UN Charter and not by political expediency or absolutely critical in ensuring we achieve peace in Afghanistan. Our most urgent need and priority is peace. We need to re-energize the peace process now at a critical point in Doha and develop a roadmap from today to the mid-state through structured discussions that would ensure the achievement of the agreed end state. You have a critical role to play in this. First, I request the UN Security Council to reiterate the call for a ceasefire, which was already expressed in resolutions 2532 and 2513. A comprehensive ceasefire has been demanded by the Afghan government, by the Afghan people, by the international community, and by the UN Secretary General. A ceasefire is not only a critical first step to peace, but will also mitigate the precarious humanitarian situation caused by COVID-19 pandemic, allowing us to reach people in conflict areas as a second wave of the virus hits, which unfortunately is upon us. Second, there is also a role for the UN to play in helping us design a process that gets us to the defined end state. There are so many lessons learned from other peace processes that can be drawn from the UN Bank of Knowledge and help inform a realistic roadmap for achieving sustainable peace. Third, I would request the Council to stress the effective and thorough implementation of sanctions regime as a key instrument for the success of the negotiations with Taliban. The Taliban has yet to fulfill the conditions set. Sanctions can only be effective if implemented by all, and any changes to current mechanism should only be considered following tangible progress in the peace process and its outcome, which we have yet to see, and also Taliban's commitment to an Afghanistan where women's constitutional rights are protected and minorities are not discriminated against. Fourth, I would also request the Council to view terrorism as an ecosystem and not a series of isolated organizations. The Security Council is uniquely placed to provide global leadership in defining and classifying terrorism as a global threat that is growing. We need a UN Security Council-backed strategy to counter terrorism. Fifth, I would also request the Council to consider the systematic role of narcotics in perpetuating and feeding the threat of terrorism. The two are inextricably linked now. We need a wider approach that addresses the links between terrorist networks and criminal organizations. Sixth, I would like to highlight the importance of regional consensus in creating sustainable peace in Afghanistan. I have consistently prioritized the issue of regional connectivity during my presidency, not only for matters of economic development and energy production, but because I have recognized its essential value in creating consensus around peace and other mutual benefits for the region. Many of our neighbors stand to gain 1 to 2% of GDP growth annually if we achieve peace in Afghanistan. Regional connectivity is a path not only to poverty reduction in the region, but also peace. We request the Security Council to consider this and work with us on helping create a strong regional consensus for a stable and peaceful Afghanistan. Next week, we will gather virtually for the 2020 Geneva Conference on Afghanistan. The outcomes of this pledging conference will heavily influence the country's future development and our path towards self-reliance and peace. For our part, we are pushing for accountability and to continue to expand the relationship between Afghanistan and the international community based on mutual priorities. I would like to thank all participating countries, but particularly Finland, for their leadership on this important conference. In closing, I want to stress that today we have an opportunity to create the ground for a real strategic discussion. Why has the conflict in and around Afghanistan persisted so tragically for 40 years? Perhaps because we as an international community have been applying a salve to the wound instead of addressing the roots of the disease. We need to have a strategic discussion on multiple fronts. The outcome will not only mean a sustainable peace for Afghanistan that allows us to continue progressing and advancing our gains, but also the eradication of the threat of global terrorism which blights us all. Once again, I thank you for your principled engagement, and I thank you in advance for its continuation. I wish you a very productive and constructive discussion.
Mr. President, I could not agree more with you. The fight for peace we can all achieve if we all stand together. Thank you, Your Excellency. I now invite the representatives of the co-sponsor countries to take the floor. The first country is Qatar, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammad bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani. The floor is yours, please.
Mr. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I am pleased to welcome His Excellency Dr. Mohammad Ashraf Rani, President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. We have listened carefully to his statement and vision regarding the situation in Afghanistan. We commend the great efforts being made under his leadership to strengthen the state institutions and improve the security and development in Afghanistan. I take this opportunity to underscore the strong relationship between the state of Qatar and the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan as we consider ourselves an international partner keen to do everything we possibly can to support Afghanistan in its endeavor toward stability, security, reconstruction, and prosperity. I would like also to thank the member states with which we have jointly convened this important meeting held at pivotal stage in Afghanistan's history that is witnessing the ongoing negotiations of the Afghan peace process. Excellencies, the unwavering position of the state of Qatar to stand by Afghanistan to restore security and peace is part and parcel of its long-standing foreign policy that has consistently provided support to achieving peace, security, and development at the regional and international levels, and to promoting the settlement of disputes by diplomatic and peaceful means. Among such efforts is the successful mediation bring about significant achievement in cooperation with our international partners. Those efforts culminated in the conclusion of the peace agreement between the United States and Taliban in Doha on 29th of February 2020. And in its resolution 2513-2020, the Security Council qualified that agreement as significant steps towards ending the war and opening the door to intra-Afghan negotiations. Despite the exceptional circumstances resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic this year, Qatari efforts have forged through and managed to achieve ceasefire during the Holy Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, as well as successful exchange of prisoners between the government of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and Taliban. There is no doubt that those successful efforts have been the result of the sincere desire of the state of Qatar to achieve peace and stability in Afghanistan without harboring any hidden agenda or serving any special interests. Such an approach does not only benefit the parties concerned, but has also a positive impact on the wider regional and international peace and security. Excellencies, the peace agreement concluded between the United States of America and the Taliban has undoubtedly provided an additional incentive to exert more effort in order to bring the Afghan parties to the table of dialogue. As continuum of the state of Qatar endeavors and fulfillment of its mediating role, Qatar hosted the intra-Afghan peace negotiations on the 12th of September. The members of the Security Council issued a press statement in which they thanked the state of Qatar for facilitating those negotiations. In this regard, I would like to acknowledge the importance of the effective role of the Security Council in supporting mediation as an effective tool to achieve peace. In this context, we look forward to an Afghan peace negotiation that would lead to the achievement of the desired comprehensive political settlement in Afghanistan, put an end to the state of violence, and pave the way to unleashing the full potential of the Afghan people and meeting their aspirations for lasting peace and stability, prosperity and progress. Such aspiration, however, will not be achieved without ensuring the rights of and active participation of all groups of the Afghan people, including women, girls, youth, and minorities. Mr. Chair, we in the state of Qatar value the important role of Afghanistan's international and regional partners. In support of the Afghan peace talks, we were pleased to collaborate with members of the Security Council and friendly states such as the Federal Republic of Germany, with which we convened the intra-Afghan dialogue in Doha in July 2019. The conference was attended by representatives from across the Afghan spectrum, political parties and civil societies, in addition to notable participation by women. We are aware that no one is more able to grasp the true dimensions and deep repercussions of the Afghan crisis, nor identify the interests of the Afghan people more than the Afghans themselves. In fact, the peace process should be Afghan-led and Afghan-owned. The role of the brotherly countries and friends should therefore be confined to one of assistance and help. Having said that, we urge all Afghan parties to uphold the national interest above any other consideration, boost confidence among all parties, accept the existence of differences, and consolidate the right of citizenship for all Afghan people. I would like to stress that the primary responsibility of the Security Council in the maintenance of international peace and security compels it to assume its responsibility and to support both the peace process in Afghanistan and the creation of the appropriate conditions conducive to its success, especially through the role of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, as well as by backstopping the ongoing diplomatic and mediation efforts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Afghan people have achieved a lot of progress in the areas of social development, freedoms, human rights, and democracy over the past 2 decades. Today, Afghanistan is going through an extremely delicate stage that calls for and even necessitates preserving and building on those gains. In this regard, the international community needs to extend all forms of support to Afghanistan by providing humanitarian and development aid, expertise, or technical and other forms of support. We express our hope that the 2020 conference on Afghanistan to be held next week in Geneva will achieve its desired goals In this regard, we commend the efforts by the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, and we affirm our continued support for it. In conclusion, the State of Qatar reiterates its solidarity with the Afghan people and affirms its continued support for them in order to consolidate national reconciliation, achieve a comprehensive and sustainable peace agreement that would restore to the Afghan people the security and stability they will deserve, and ensure that they would live a decent life after long decades of suffering from continued fighting. And I thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Finland Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Pekka Haavisto. Please.
Your Excellencies, members of the Security Council, first I would like to thank His Excellency President Rani for his opening remarks. Finland is honored to co-sponsor this meeting. I would like to thank Estonia and also the other co-sponsors for arranging this topical event, and of course my colleague Minister Reinsalu for excellent chairmanship. Finland aligns with the statement on behalf of the Nordic countries presented by Norway. It's essential that the Security Council, according to its mandate, pays sustained attention to the Afghanistan peace process. Afghanistan is Finland's largest development cooperation partner. We have been an active member of the international community in Afghanistan since 2002. The start of the Afghanistan peace negotiations is a welcomed opportunity to finally put an end to 4 decades of conflict. But the road of peace is still long. We are devoted to stand with people of Afghanistan at this important junction of peace and stability. The current level of violence by Taliban, especially against civilian population, is unacceptable. It undermines the ongoing negotiations and the will and right of the Afghan people to lead a peaceful life. Immediate and permanent ceasefire is urgently needed, and the negotiations must be inclusive with equal and meaningful participation of women at all stages. Your Excellencies, colleagues, Finland is proud to host the Afghanistan Conference next week in Geneva. This is a historic time. The conference offers an opportunity to demonstrate our continued commitment to the security and well-being of all Afghan people, especially women and girls, and their rights to choose their country's future. The conference will have 3 outcomes: new aid architecture, political communique, and pledges of aid. Firstly, with the new aid architecture called the Afghanistan Partnership Framework, the government of Afghanistan and donors set joint development priorities for the next 4 years. Secondly, the political communique of the conference is the first occasion for the international community to express a view on the peace negotiations. Finland remains confident that the international community can agree on joint messages. Thirdly, we hope that all participating countries will contribute with aid pledges corresponding with the historic occasion. Afghanistan needs our long-standing support more than ever in preserving and building on the progress achieved in the past 19 years. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Norway Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Ina Eriksen Søreide.
I have the pleasure of speaking not only as co-sponsor, but also on behalf of all the Nordic countries, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Sweden and Norway. We're pleased to take part in this timely discussion in the lead-up to the donor conference next week. Supporting peace, stability and development in Afghanistan is a top priority for the Nordics. For years, we have worked closely with the Afghan government, the Afghan people and the international community to this end. In a few days, we will reconfirm our commitment to support the people of Afghanistan at the Geneva Conference. The intra-Afghan negotiations represent a historic opportunity for peace. Nordic expectations and principles are clear. In order to be sustainable, a peace agreement needs to have human rights, gender equality, rule of law and a constitutional framework at its core. It will be important to uphold and expand on the important progress made to date. Experience also shows that the likelihood of a lasting peace is significantly enhanced with the meaningful participation of women in all aspects of negotiations and peace building. We're deeply concerned about the high level of violence which present an obstacle to peace. We again call for a ceasefire. The Afghan people deserve it. We condemn the appalling terrorist attacks targeting civilians, ethnic groups, university students, journalists, new mothers, and their babies. This must end, and the perpetrators must be brought to justice. The Security Council should support the peace process by maintaining a strong focus on stability and security in Afghanistan, especially in light of the expected international military drawdown. The Security Council should also strongly support the meaningful inclusion of women as well as of minorities and victims in the peace process. We commend UNAMA for its important role in helping to promote an inclusive peace process and coordinating the donor community. When Norway enters the Security Council as an elected member in January, we will bring our long-standing commitment to peace, stability and development in Afghanistan with us into the work of the Council. I would like to express my deep appreciation for the work Germany and Indonesia have done as penholders on Afghanistan in the Council, and express Norway's intention to continue this work in close cooperation with our Baltic partner Estonia. Let me conclude by underlining that we know that a peace process is complex. Difficult compromises have to be made. But Afghanistan needs to seize this historic opportunity for peace. The Nordics stand ready to do our part in support. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Indonesia, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Retno Marsudi. Please.
Your Excellency, Mr. Mohammad Ashraf Ghani, President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, colleagues, distinguished participants. It is indeed high time to redouble our joint effort to achieve progress on the peace process for the best interests of the Afghani people. The disturbing rise of violence, with a recorded 6,000 civilian casualties this year, underlines the urgency to start the process. We have no other option but ensure that peace talk take place. Peace talk that is Afghan-owned, Afghan-led. Peace talk that puts Afghani people at the heart of it. I urge the international community to bolster its commitment and contribution to make peace a reality. Against this backdrop, allow me to underline 3 pertinent points. First, violence must stop. According to SIGA report, attacks against Afghan forces and civilians were 50% higher between July till September. Continued violence will only erode peace effort and reduce trust of the Afghan people. It will eventually delegitimize the process and its desired outcome. We must not wait for it to stop. We must act quickly. Second, our collective contribution must be amplified. This is the time for every one of us to be part of the solution. No matter how big or small our contribution to make Afghanistan a better place counts. I call on all Council members to stand united for the people of Afghanistan and put differences and national interests aside. I also appeal to the international community to elevate their contribution for Afghanistan, to create conducive conditions on the ground, to enhance their capacity to better govern themselves, and to support their economy to better cater for their people. Third, synergy between UN system and the peace process must be strengthened. We must guide the UN to better reinforce the peace process. This synergy will help the UN to better protect lives on the ground, to better serve the most vulnerable people in Afghanistan. This effort will contribute to create a conducive environment, a prerequisite towards peace. On inclusive participation of the peace process, the UN's role is also important in supporting women empowerment, including in politics. The issue of women empowerment is always in my heart. No voice should be discounted when it comes to reconciliation and nation building. On my last note, I would like to stress that it is in every country's best interest that peace in Afghanistan prevails. It will lead to progress and development not only for Afghanistan, but also for the region and beyond. And to close, allow me, Mr. President, to reiterate Indonesia's firm commitment to stand together with the Afghan people until they achieve their long-awaited peace. I thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, Mr. President, distinguished ministers, briefers, ambassadors, and those watching us online, allow me now to make a statement in my national capacity. The start of the Afghanistan peace negotiations on 12 September in Doha presented a historic opportunity to achieve the long-held aspirations of the people of Afghanistan for peace and reconciliation. We now have every reason to expect progress. And however, every day the headlines tell us a very different story, with increasing violence reaching alarming levels. We have called this meeting to show that the international community continues to take great interest in the negotiations as well as in the situation on the ground. Afghanistan has come a long way in the last 2 decades. Higher life expectancy, lower child mortality, more children in school, and a greater representation of women in public life. Those gains must be celebrated. With the support of the international community, the respect for democracy and human rights, especially women's rights, have become a fundamental part of the new Afghan society. The government has taken concrete steps by committing to developing the country in an inclusive manner, by fighting corruption and by working with the international community to guarantee accountability in their actions. There is undeniably still much room for improvement, notably with regard to corruption, but we insist that these gains must be preserved and built upon. This will in turn directly affect the international support to the country. The 2020 Afghanistan Conference in Geneva next week is a valuable opportunity for both Afghanistan and the international community to commit to assisting Afghanistan on its way to a more peaceful, stable and self-reliant state. Finland, together with the government of Afghanistan and the UN, have done an excellent job in making this conference happen under the extraordinary circumstances of the global pandemic. We encourage every country to participate and show solidarity by pledging their support at this very important moment. Having said that, we also emphasize today the firm conditionality of our assistance. It stems from our hope of seeing the situation on the ground toxa improve and giving the peace process a real chance to succeed. Firstly, before further concessions can be made, there needs to be an immediate and significant reduction of violence leading to a permanent ceasefire. Permanent ceasefire. A global ceasefire has been repeatedly called upon by the entire international community, the Secretary General and this Council. And we stress once again that both parties, but especially the Taliban, must fulfill their commitments and work towards ending violence to save civilian lives. It is unacceptable that 9 months after the signing of the agreements in Doha and Kabul, the level of violence on the ground is the highest it has been in years. We condemn in the strongest terms the cowardly terrorist attacks which remain the most serious threat to peace and security. And there is no excuse for the deliberate attacks on healthcare personnel and educational facilities. It is essential that such crimes are investigated and perpetrators are held accountable. Secondly, the peace negotiations must move forward in good faith. These talks are the best chance for peace in Afghanistan in a generation, And it is the sole responsibility of Afghans themselves to lead the country out of years of violence and war. Both the negotiations and the following peace settlement must remain inclusive, with the meaningful participation of women, minorities and youth. Human rights and fundamental freedoms are universal and should be the highest priority on the peace negotiations agenda. The aim should also be to work towards a country of economic development and growth that provides new opportunities for its citizens, where their rights are upheld and women, children and marginalized groups are protected. And we wish to see the peace talks succeed and expect an equally cooperative spirit and strong will to advance the talks from all sides at the negotiation table. Lastly, let me assure you that Estonia will remain committed to Afghanistan also as a member of this Council. We sincerely thank Germany and Indonesia for the masterful, diligent work as current penholders of the Afghanistan in the United Nations Security Council. Estonia, together with Norway, is ready and willing to take up this responsibility from next year. And we support a peaceful, stable and secure Afghanistan. Our brave soldiers have lost their lives to make it happen. We stand prepared to cooperatively and effectively continue to contribute to this cause. I thank you for your attention. Allow me now to introduce our distinguished briefers. Firstly, I'm glad to welcome Ms. Deborah Lyons, a special representative of the Security Council area, the Secretary General Special Representative for Afghanistan and head of the United Nations Assistant Mission in Afghanistan. Ms. Lyons, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Minister. I hope you can hear me all right. Your Excellency, President Ghani, ambassadors, distinguished co-sponsors, and members of the Council and friends of Afghanistan. Salam alaikum, greetings to all of you, from all of us here in Geneva, where we are completing the final preparations for the Afghanistan 2020 Pledging Conference, which will see the engagement of some 70 countries and some 30 organizations. This conference is truly an appropriate hallmark of this most momentous year for Afghan peace after decades of conflict. Today, I will focus on the very pertinent question put to us by the co-sponsors. What can the Security Council do to support the peace process? First, a few words on where the process stands. The February agreement between the Taliban and the United States and the concomitant declaration between Afghanistan and the United States paved the way for the start of peace talks. This indeed has not been easy. After a long impasse, over prisoner releases, the talks opened in Doha on the 12th of September with strong support from the Qatari government. An initial host country support group comprising Germany, Indonesia, Norway, and Uzbekistan was formed to assist the Qatari hosts and to support the Afghan parties. Of course, UNAMA's Peace and Reconciliation team forms a critical part of this group. Hopes were high, but progress slowed as the two parties remained deadlocked for weeks on language that were to frame the negotiations. But it is positive that both sides remained at the peace talks and at the table throughout the painstaking negotiations. And finally, we have heard this week that possibly the two parties are close to an agreement on the code of conduct, which would then unlock discussions of the draft agenda. This would be a highly positive development. As this new chapter opens, the international community must see how we can reinforce these efforts so that peace stands the very best chance of an eventual success. Firstly, this means reinforcing the environment for peace within Afghanistan itself. And on this front, nothing is more pressing than the need to reduce violence, which has been noted by, I think, every speaker before me. Civilian casualties remain devastatingly high. Every violent incident results in another family, another community where lives have been shattered. Women, men, boys, and girls continue to be killed, to face long-term injuries, to face displacement, to lose their homes and their livelihoods, and possibly the worst of all, the total loss of hope. This violence has dented public confidence in the peace process. Recent brutal attacks in Kabul on the Education Center and Kabul University, as well as the increased violence in many of the provinces, have shocked the Afghan population, accustomed though they are to the horrors of war. I commend the Afghan Republic for its continued commitment to the talks, despite the corrosive effect of the battlefield violence. But clearly, there is a need for a declared reduction in violence, or ideally, an eventual ceasefire. The UN Security Council can continue to issue this call. And yet, despite these challenges, Afghanistan can draw strength from its incredible diversity. But this diversity itself must be respected and fully engaged throughout the talks to ensure a truly lasting peace. I therefore recognize the Afghan Republic team and the State Ministry of Peace for their active outreach to media, civil society, and religious groups. And it is also positive that the Taliban have engaged as well in outreach in their areas. Both negotiating parties must intensify this dialogue with all Afghans from all sectors of society, including in remote areas, in order to build the foundations that will be necessary for reconciliation and lasting peace. And speaking of foundations, let me say to the members of the UN Security Council that your significant resolutions in these past years have been particularly helpful. Through your resolutions, such as 1325 on women, peace, and security, and Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security, the Council has provided strong normative guidance, which we, UNAMA, and the UN family use in our work with the Afghan parties to support inclusion at every level, from international conferences to grassroots initiatives at the village level. But the road ahead will be rocky. As the talks progress, sensitive but important issues will come to the fore. Human rights, women's rights, minority rights, religious rights, freedom of expression, and the rights of victims of war, the role of Islam, the future of democracy, education, rule of law, transnational terror, and narcotics. All of these issues are ultimately for Afghans themselves to decide, but the international community, particularly through the UN Security Council, must make its views known and warn of the possible consequences should the country slide back. This is particularly true of Afghanistan's human rights commitments. The UN Security Council could reaffirm the importance of continued adherence to Afghanistan's existing international obligations, including the 7 core international human rights treaties to which Afghanistan is party, irrespective of the government of the day. Engagement by the Council can also bolster the role of Afghanistan's neighbors in the peace process. A peaceful Afghanistan would enable the whole region to prosper and benefit the lives of all. Improved economic connectivity, transit trade, power supply, and economic cooperation would lift the income for all countries. And so, in concert with the resident coordinators of the UN in the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, I have launched an initiative across the United Nations family to strengthen the regional links in our programming. So far, I have been very gratified and energized by the positive response, yes, from my colleagues, but most particularly from all of the governments in the region. I plan to continue my visits to the neighboring countries in the near future to ensure that we can advance this work further. Ladies and gentlemen, the regional voice for peace in Afghanistan must be amplified and supported by all of us. On the larger international front, prospects for peace must also be underpinned by sustained international assistance. Next week's pledging conference in Geneva will be a demonstration of this. I pay tribute to the government of Afghanistan and the government of Finland for their incredible hard work as conference co-chairs. This year it will be different, not only because of COVID-19, but because the path which peace will take is still unclear. International support, however, will ensure that the Afghan state can build stronger institutions, provide basic services to its deserving people, and alleviate the worst of their suffering as peace is taking hold. In return, of course, the Afghan government is expected to assure donors that their money will be spent wisely and with increased accountability. So too, your ongoing engagement as the UN Security Council will be a critical signal of support for Afghans in their quest for peace. Resolution 2513, adopted on the 10th of March, provides a solid and principled basis for durable peace in Afghanistan. I want you to know that this resolution is often quoted back to me by the Afghan people, by its leadership, and by regional partners as a solid, principled foundation for all member states to respect and support. To that end, we remain committed to helping Afghanistan work through and towards a peaceful end state that is inclusive of all Afghans and preserving the rights of the whole population in keeping with global values and global standards. Daily, I am reminded that the United Nations has a vital role as the umbrella under which we can all work for peace without self-interest. This impartiality can be further leveraged to engage the Afghan parties and all of the stakeholders. I said at the beginning that this was a momentous year. Clearly, the year ahead will see even greater changes in this wonderful country. Changes in this country that has been at the forefront of global attention for these past many decades. I look forward to working with the Council through the many challenges that lie ahead. Thank you, Minister. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons, for bringing your expertise to this debate. Our second briefer, Ms. Fatima Gailani, is a member of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan's negotiating team. She is also board member of the Afghan Red Crescent Society and a determined women's rights activist. The floor is yours, Ms. Gailani, please.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Council members, following of your Resolution 2513 dated March 10, 2020, which welcomed the progress towards the political settlement of the war in Afghanistan, I wish to highlight the longing of the people of Afghanistan for a dignified peace. For far too long in my country, the human rights situation has been a headline. Behind the headlines, our women, men, daughters, and sons have endured a pain of war. In this war, loved ones, including children, were lost. This had a lasting economic and social consequences to our people. When a breadwinner is killed, the impact of the rest of the family is devastating. We feel the urgency of ending this senseless violence. That's why reduction of violence and eventually ceasefire is must. Our youth have not been safe while at education facilities. They have been attacked blindly and mercilessly. Certainly, these young peoples were not the cause of wars. The responsibility now falls upon us, the negotiators, to deliver the path to peace for them. Members of the Islamic Republic negotiation team are reflecting the reality of our society today. Therefore, these men, women, and youth carrying the aspiration of our nation to the better tomorrow. To do so, we need other nations' help and support. Afghanistan has friends who have supported us generously over the decades of instability and conflict and rebuilding our country. Today, we still need your steadfast support for a lasting peace. A lasting peace is the one which is inclusive and fair to all, that preserves our gains in democracy, especially equality of rights for all, men and women alike. A peace that will honor the victims of war of all sides and pave the path for justice. We are committed and are working towards these goals. We hope our friends in the international community, especially members of this distinguished council and our neighboring countries, to stand with us as we walk through this very difficult but noble path. We also count on the Islamic countries to share their models of excellence in social developments as well as justice. Dear Council members, on behalf of women of Afghanistan, on behalf of people of Afghanistan, let me convey our appreciations of the work of the United Nations in Afghanistan for the last many, many years. An important role that I hope will continue in the future for peace and development. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fatima Gailani, for bringing your insights from the negotiations to our discussion here. And last but not least, I'm glad to introduce Ms. Laurel Miller, who directs the Asia program at the International Crisis Group. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Distinguished speakers and participants, thank you for the opportunity to join you for this discussion today. As all of the preceding speakers have emphasized, a negotiated settlement to the conflict in Afghanistan would be the best way to advance peace and prosperity in that country and contribute to security beyond its borders. But it goes without explaining in this forum that peacemaking is hard and that more often than not, it fails. As an independent observer, I can perhaps best contribute to this discussion by highlighting a few key risks and realities that are important for those supporting an Afghan peace process to reflect in their policies and their diplomacy, if the process is to have the greatest possible chance of success. First, if the peace process succeeds, in other words, in the most optimistic scenario, the process will result in a government of which the Taliban are a substantial part, and which is structurally different than what we see today. What exactly the Taliban share and the structural changes will be can only be determined through negotiations, but trade-offs have to be expected. To anticipate otherwise would be to hope for the Taliban to surrender, and there is no sign of that. If and when the Afghan parties begin substantive negotiations, their starting positions are likely to be very far apart on the most fundamental questions of the political system and what kinds of democratic features it will and won't have as compared to the existing system. Either there will be compromises on these questions or there will not be a negotiated settlement, in which case the bloodshed will continue with or without a foreign troop presence, and Afghanistan's economic prospects will remain stunted. One policy implication of this reality is that it is more important to focus on support for the peace process than on specific outcomes. This is not to suggest that supporting countries or institutions abandon their own values, but it is to say that without placing an end to the bloodshed, to the human toll, at the apex of desired outcomes in the nearer term, other desired outcomes, rights, justice for victims, democratic features, are unlikely to be realized over the longer term. If the mantra Afghan-owned and Afghan-led means anything, it should mean that members of the international community will support the outcomes of an Afghan peace negotiation without imposing their own red lines. Another policy implication is that if a negotiated settlement materializes, promoting its implementation will require providing financial support to a government that includes the Taliban. This is a reality that may be well understood in this group, but may also be difficult to absorb for some parliaments and publics of countries that have been at war with the Taliban for 2 decades. A second reality I'll highlight concerns timing constraints on the peace process. As I'm sure is well known to this group, peace processes generally are lengthy, often years-long affairs. In Afghanistan's case, the relatively straightforward US-Taliban agreement signed in February took nearly 1.5 years to negotiate, after years of quiet preparatory steps. The more complex topics to be negotiated among Afghans will not easily be amenable to quick resolution. An incremental approach to negotiations in which compromises are gradually accumulated, building toward the most difficult issues, would offer the best chance for the parties to evolve their positions and acclimate their constituencies to compromises. This kind of approach takes time. The US-Taliban agreement, however, has shortened the time horizon for talks. It's not hard to imagine some flexibility on the agreement's May 2021 deadline for a full withdrawal of all foreign forces and other non-diplomatic personnel, particularly considering that none of the other deadlines in the text have been met so far. And it is theoretically possible that the Biden administration, when it takes office, will revisit elements of the deal or interpret some of its requirements more stringently. Such modifications could extend the withdrawal timeline. Regardless of any Taliban flexibility or stiffened American conditionality, or even US abandonment of the deal, which I do not expect, the withdrawal provisions have undoubtedly shaped Taliban expectations. The withdrawal timeline was a big win for them, and they had insisted on that win upfront before commencing talks with other Afghans. It is unlikely Afghan talks can be sustained if that win is not sustained. And unfortunately, it is also unlikely that talks would continue after a full withdrawal. The timeline may be somewhat elastic, but probably can't be stretched very far. I mention the timing issue in part because some have been quite understandably frustrated with the dramatic urgency of US diplomacy over the last couple of years and may be hoping for that to change. I cannot predict, of course, what the Biden administration's approach will be, but I can say that objective analysis of the options available will have to treat the US Taliban agreement as a fact on the ground, and will have to resolve the tension between the timing expectations that it created and the benefits of an incremental process. Finally, I'll conclude with a practical suggestion for Security Council members' consideration. A missing feature of the peace process so far is an empowered, impartial mediator. It is difficult to see how the parties will be able to bridge the substantial distance between their starting positions without such help. Several governments have informally played a mediation role in the process so far, but this ad hoc approach is less likely to be effective as the talks get more difficult. A Security Council imprimatur for a mediator would be helpful. Such an imprimatur would reflect the common interests of Security Council members in a stable Afghanistan that contributes to regional stability and provides no safe harbor for international terrorists. It would also signal the clear backing of key countries for the peace process, countries whose support will be needed not only to keep the process on track, but also to create conditions for effective implementation of any results. Over the next 2 months, while the future direction of American policy cannot be certain, the crucial task will be to keep the Afghan talks currently stalled on life support. After that point, a push to put in place a mediator could help to re-energize the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Laurel Miller, for joining us and adding your voice to the debate. And now invite the representatives of the Security Council member states to take the floor. First is United States of America Permanent Representative, Ms. Kelly Craft. Please.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Let me start by thanking the briefers here today for their valuable insight into the ongoing peace process. I'd of course like to thank President Ghani for sharing his assessment and vision with us. Allow me to take the opportunity to convey our appreciation to Special Envoy Lyons for the excellent leadership she continues to demonstrate at UNAMA. We are particularly grateful for UNAMA's unique and crucial role in supporting this peace process, promoting human rights, working to empower women, and supporting democracy in Afghanistan. Before sharing the U.S. perspective on how the Security Council can support the Afghan peace process, I would like to comment on the horrific violence we have seen over the past few weeks in Afghanistan. The attacks on schools and universities are heartbreaking and are only the most recent examples of how this protracted conflict has terrorized and victimized innocent civilians. Students and educators must be allowed safe, supportive learning environments that are free from violence and threats. As noted in September's UN Security Council presidential statement, these deplorable acts must be condemned and perpetrators held accountable. Tremendous challenges lie ahead for all engaged in this process to establish a sovereign, unified, and democratic Afghanistan that is at peace with itself and at peace with its neighbors. We must remain vigilant as spoilers attempt to disrupt this cause of peace. There are concrete ways this Council can support Afghanistan's peace process. First, we should continue to use our platform to condemn violence while impressing upon the parties that it's crucial and critical that they not allow cowardly acts to derail the progress toward peace. The ongoing talks in Doha demonstrate the commitment of all parties to find a path forward for their country that provides the Afghan people a promising future free of terrorism. The second thing this Council can do is stress that a peaceful future for Afghanistan cannot be achieved without the meaningful participation of women along the way. Mrs. Gilani, as one of the 4 women representing the Islamic Republic in negotiations, represents a crucial voice, and she must be heard. The role of women in these negotiations is not limited to a narrow set of issues that affect women alone. Their full participation is vital to achieving this peace, this stability, and economic growth that will ensure a better future for Afghanistan. This leads to my final recommendation. We should not hesitate to convey that we will calibrate our actions to the outcome of the ongoing talks. The United States has been clear and direct on this issue. While the final political settlement is one for Afghans themselves to decide, our political and economic support will determine based upon the decisions Afghans make, including on the rights of women and girls and the rights of ethnic and religious minorities. At the Donors Conference next week, we will reaffirm our support for the Afghanistan and for its people. But we will also continue to be candid about our desire to see Afghanistan make real progress on social, political, and economic reforms. Finally, we thank Finland, Afghanistan, and the United Nations for their efforts to organize this conference, especially amid the constraints posed by COVID-19. In closing, allow me to thank the co-host of today's discussion for convening this meeting to exchange views on how the United Nations can help the Afghan people at such a historic moment. This Council must support them as they build a future of peace and a future of harmony. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Tunisia Permanent Representative, Mr. Tarek Ladeb. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to express our appreciation to Estonia and all the co-organizers for convening this timely meeting on the peace process in Afghanistan. We are honored by the presence with us today with His Excellency Mohammad Ashraf Rani, President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, and I thank him for his comprehensive keynote speech. I would like also to acknowledge the participation of their Excellencies Ministers of Foreign Affairs. Last but not least, I would like to thank Ms. Deborah Lyons, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Afghanistan, and all the briefers for their insightful presentations. Mr. President, Tunisia reiterates its full support for the peace process in Afghanistan and its solidarity with the Afghan people and government. We welcome the start of the negotiations between the government and the Taliban last September and would like to express our appreciation to Qatar for facilitating these negotiations and hosting their first round. We also note with satisfaction the support expressed by all Afghanistan neighbors, and the international community at large in favor of the Afghan peace process. Mr. President, while sincerely hoping that the current peace process will rapidly bring security, stability, and prosperity to the Afghan people, we are deeply concerned by the recent attacks attributed to the Taliban, which resulted in numerous casualties among Afghan forces and the civilian populations, attacks that we believe could seriously complicate and even derail the negotiations. We are particularly troubled by the recent targeting of civil society and media organizations that cost the life of many of their representatives. These attacks further raise the concerns expressed by many in and outside Afghanistan that peace might come at the sacrifice of freedoms and rights. We call on the Taliban leadership to do its utmost to put an end to such attacks, to honor its counter-terrorism commitments, and to negotiate in good faith with the government of Afghanistan. Mr. President, we also would like to underline again today the importance of an inclusive Afghan-led, Afghan-owned peace process with a meaningful participation of women and youth in order to achieve a sustainable peace. We accordingly believe that any political agreement should clearly include guarantees to protect and promote fundamental rights and freedom for all Afghanistan, with a particular focus on women's rights. We also believe that the peace process should be accompanied by an ambitious international effort to assist Afghanistan on the economical and social levels. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is Vietnam. Permanent representative, Mr. Dang Dinh Quy, please. Please unmute your mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, ministers. I welcome the President Ghani and other distinguished participants. I thank Estonia, Afghanistan, Finland, Germany, Indonesia, Norway, and Qatar for co-hosting this very important meeting and the panelists for their contributions. Mr. Chair, the year 2020 marks a historic year for the people of Afghanistan. The start of intra-Afghan peace negotiations in Doha in September opened the pathway for the pursuit of long-term peace in the country. Vietnam reiterates our strong support for the Afghan-led and Afghan-owned inclusive peace process and welcome the consistent efforts of President Ghani and the Afghan government in this regard. We also commend UNAMA, regional and international partner, for contributing to peace and development in the country. While significant progress has been made, lasting peace is still far from being guaranteed. We are concerned about the increasing level of violence and victims and civilian casualties, including women and children, and in the past few weeks. We condemn attacks on civilian objects, particularly schools and hospitals. We share our deep condolences to the families of the victims in the tragic incident in Kabul University on November the 2nd. And I would like to make 3 points. First, the intra-Afghan peace negotiation need a stable and conducive environment. A timely permanent ceasefire must be reached to put an end to the ongoing violence. We urge all parties to fully respect international humanitarian law and allow unhindered access to humanitarian services in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. Second, efforts in protecting vulnerable groups, including displaced persons, must be strengthened. We welcome and encourage efforts to facilitate meaningful participation of women and youth in the peace processes and the reconstruction of Afghanistan. Such participation should be promoted, not prevented. Third, the economic and humanitarian situation in Afghanistan must be improved. More than 12 million people, over 1/3 of the country population, are severely food insecure, with an alarming increase of 800,000 people in emergency level compared to last year's. We call on the international community to step up assistance for Afghanistan and look forward to a successful outcome of the 2020 Afghanistan Conference on civilian assistance in Geneva next week. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And the next speaker is France Deputy Permanent Representative, Ms. Nathalie Broadhurst. Please.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank the co-organizer of this meeting as well as all the briefers. The start of the inter-Afghan negotiation has created an opportunity for a peaceful resolution of the conflict, but the road to a lasting peace is still long. And while the international community will accompany Afghanistan in this process, this support will not be unconditional. This is the message that we will carry in a few days at the Donors Conference that will open on November 23rd in Geneva. This support will depend on the sincere engagement of all parties and on the respect of their commitments, particularly those made in the February agreements. In Resolution 2513, the Security Council welcomed these agreements as a first step towards peace. Since then, confidence-building measures have made it possible to start negotiations, but they are not sufficient, and they must continue, first and foremost by the reduction of violence. This is a priority. We continue to call for the implementation of Resolution 2532 with the immediate establishment of a cessation of hostilities and a humanitarian pause. Civilians, and in particular children, continue to pay the heaviest toll in this conflict. We reiterate our strong condemnation of the recent attacks. The preservation of humanitarian space, the protection of civilians, including humanitarian and medical personnel, as well as civilian infrastructure, must be a top priority. It is imperative that all parties respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. Efforts to combat impunity must also be strengthened. The release of prisoners has made it possible to start negotiations, but peace must not be achieved at any price. Those who commit these attacks must be punished. Another essential condition for sustainable peace, as well as support from the international community, will be the full participation of women. Women must be included in all spheres of public life and all relevant processes. Peace will not be achieved without them, nor at the expenses of their rights. We will not compromise on this point, and we deplore the fact that only one of the parties to the negotiation has included women in its negotiation team. As I have said, the sustainability of peace will also depend on the fulfillment of each party's commitments. The Security Council will tailor its supports by making full use of the tools at its disposal, based on the sincere investments of all. Among its tools, the review of the 1988 Committee's sanction list is possible, but as the Council indicated in Resolution 2513, it will only be done in the light of progress in peace. In particular, we expect the Taliban to meet its commitment under the February 29 agreement, in particular by severing its ties with international terrorist organizations, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS. We remain attentive to the progress of the discussions and to the pledges that each of the parties will make to preserve the gains made in terms of democracy, human rights for all, as well as the renunciation of violence. Our collective objective must remain the establishment of a lasting peace, for which the resolute commitment of Afghanistan's partners at its side is indispensable. France stands ready to facilitate the peace process at the request of the parties, and it intends to continue its commitments to support Afghanistan's security as well as economic and social development. Finally, I would like to commend the work of UNEMA and of Deborah Lyons. Their engagements in Afghanistan is a key component of the peace process, and the Security Council should remain mobilized in supporting them. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Dominican Republic Permanent Representative, Mr. Jose Singer. Please.
We would like to thank the organizers of today's Area Formera meeting. Likewise, our appreciation goes to the briefers for the relevant observations and recommendations in the maintenance of peace and stability for the post-war in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has come a long way in the last 2 decades. This is a major opportunity to bring peace to a country that has suffered decades of bloodshed. With it, significant challenges still remain, such as power sharing, the promotion and protection of human rights, including women's rights and others. Intra-Afghan peace talks are the best means to end this conflict and to have a fully unified force to pursue success. A pursuit that must count with the participation of every segment of society, especially women and youth, with the goal to stop violence but also to foster tolerance. We reiterate that this peace process must be owned and led by Afghans. Nevertheless, peace can be achieved without close cooperation of the international community, including this Council and the government of Afghanistan. The international community plays an outstanding role and must do its part to help Afghans achieve a sustainable solution to the conflict. We would like to take the opportunity to commend this meeting's organizers for their strong support to this process. Despite these talks, civilians continue to pay the price, with high levels of violence and civil casualties, such as murder of women and children, as well as students in their classrooms. This is deeply worrisome, contributing to an environment of distrust that could obstruct negotiations. So we welcome the significant step taken by the government of Afghanistan on the development of a national peace and development framework for 2021 to 2025, focusing on market building, state building, and peace building, including response to COVID-19, addressing corruption, empowerment of women and girls, good governance, and the rule of law and justice. It promises a journey to prosperity for Afghanistan. We encourage the continuous collaboration with UNAMA for its implementation. The upcoming quadrennial pledging ministerial conference, to be held by Finland in Geneva, is a sign of optimism for many Afghans. We are confident that it will help move the country toward peace, prosperity, and self-reliance. Mr. President, despite the ideological differences between the Afghan government and the Taliban, fundamental changes that will produce real and successful peace can still be achieved. So consequently, any agreement must be adequately address human rights, including women's rights, rule of law, local security, and freedom of expression. We do recognize the progress made by the government of Afghanistan on child protection and women's participation in the latest intra-Afghan peace talks. However, Afghan women, including young women and those living in rural areas, must participate actively and meaningfully in all stages and dimensions of the peace process. Moreover, the rights of Afghan women, their hard-won gains, can't be compromised or utilized as a bargaining chip in the negotiations. Children in Afghanistan have experienced some of the highest rates of conflict-related casualties in the world, many resulting from violations of international humanitarian law. Therefore, child protection should be a priority in Afghanistan peace talks, explicitly agreeing to put an end to all 6 grave violations: the release of children alleged or associated to armed groups, and adopting handover protocols to transfer children to child protection authorities. Afghanistan is at an important juncture. More than ever, the country needs international community support. There's a chance for the Taliban and the Afghan government to work together to end the conflict, but it must be built on trust and a very tangible one. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Niger. Permanent Representative Mr. Abdul Abari, please.
Excellency, Mr. President Ghani, Excellencies, Mr. Foreign Ministers, Foreign Affairs Ministers, Madam SRG, distinguished briefers, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to join previous speakers in condemning in the strongest possible term the recent terrorist attacks that took place at Kabul University and the Kabul Education Center, and extend our heartfelt condolences to the victims, their families, and the people of Afghanistan, while hoping for a smooth recovery for the injured. In line with the press statement issued by the Security Council in the aftermath of these attacks, I would like to reiterate that terrorism in all its form and manifestation constitutes one of the most serious threats to international peace and security, and we ought to bring any and all of these perpetrators to justice. If need be, these attacks are a stark reminder that the road will be long and rocky to a comprehensive and lasting peace in Afghanistan. The ongoing peace talks represent a crucial step for the future of Afghanistan, and my delegation would like to assure the government and the people of Afghanistan of our full support. Mr. Chair, ending the war in Afghanistan will require much more than just talks. Indeed, to fully transition to peace, it's necessary that we establish solid foundation for a comprehensive peace process. To that effect, the inclusion of all key stakeholders, especially diverse sector of civil society, women, youth, minorities, and journalists is essential. Niger supports such inclusiveness, as history has shown that any time these stakeholders are engaged and given a meaningful place at the table, lasting peace and sustainable development follow. We must support the Afghan government in not only fostering and enhancing the rights of women and other groups, but also in solidifying the gains made in the past 2 decades, as mentioned by the Secretary General in his report, so that their vision for the future of Afghanistan is fully taken into account. Mr. Chair, supporting the Afghan peace process also means supporting the Afghan government in developing a comprehensive capacity building and professionalization of the security sector, and building a national public consensus on the future relation between diverse groups, as suggested by experts. Finally, as we know too well, building a sustainable peace always lies in addressing the root cause of conflict. In that regard, the role of a healthy economy cannot be underestimated. We would like to stress the importance of the international community's commitment to the Afghan people, especially to mitigate the dramatic effect of COVID-19 and encourage the United Nations system, Afghanistan friends and donor country to continue their much-needed support at a crucial moment in the country's history. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is China, Deputy Permanent Representative, Mr. Geng Shuang. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for chairing today's meeting. I welcome the presence of President Ghani and all the other foreign ministers. I listened very carefully to their statements and also the remarks of the briefers. Afghanistan is the heart of Asia. The situation there has a direct impact on the peace and stability of the region. As the peace and reconciliation process now enters a critical juncture, so does the future of Afghanistan. China welcomes the launch of the first intra-Afghan negotiations in Doha on September the 12th, which provides a window of opportunity to end the conflict that has plagued Afghanistan for decades. The negotiation process will not be an easy and smooth sailing, but the parties involved should stay committed and strive for the best result. History has told us that the Afghanistan issue can only be resolved through political means. The international community should respect the Afghan people's will and make sure the peace process is Afghan-led and Afghan-owned. No external actors shall impose solutions. All use the Afghanistan issue to serve their domestic agenda. China stands ready to provide a platform for intra-Afghan talks and will continue to work with other parties to push forward the peace process. We strongly condemn recent terrorist attacks against the educational institutions in Afghanistan, which caused heavy casualties among students. This once again shows that the security situation in Afghanistan remains tense. Continued support from the international community is needed to strengthen the capacity of Afghan security forces so as to better combat terrorism, protect civilians, and improve the security situation on the ground. While here I would like to emphasize again, the withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan should be conducted in an orderly and responsible manner to avoid a security vacuum, which will lead to the return of terrorists and undermine the interests of Afghanistan and regional countries. Afghanistan is a bridge between South Asia and Central Asia. Only through connectivity and regional cooperation can it be fully unleash its geographical potentials to better promote national development and improve people's livelihood. China will continue to help Afghanistan strengthen economic ties and connectivity partnerships with regional countries, including through collaboration under the Belt and Road Initiative. We call upon the international community to provide more support for the socio-economic development of Afghanistan and help it implement National Peace and Development Framework 2021 to 2025. China welcomes the upcoming 2020 Afghanistan Conference in Geneva. We wish the conference a full success and hope to see pledge of substantial assistance to Afghan people by the international community. It is highly imperative to scale up humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan to help it contain the COVID-19 pandemic. China has already provided several batches of medical aid and sent medical expert teams to Afghanistan. And we will continue to stand with Afghan people and offer our help. Finally, let me emphasize, as a close neighbor and sincere friend of Afghanistan, China is a supporter, mediator, and facilitator of the peace and reconciliation process in Afghanistan. We will continue working closely with the international community and playing a constructive role for peace, tranquility, and prosperity in Afghanistan. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is Belgium, Deputy Permanent Representative, Ms. Karen van Vlierbergen, please. Please unmute your mic.
Mr. President, thank you so much. And I too want to thank the organizers for convening this meeting and the briefers for their presentation. I welcome the participation of President Ghani to this area meeting as well as of the many ministers of foreign affairs. We are closely watching the developments in Doha, where we hope that the intra-Afghan talks will bring peace to the Afghan people. All parties should show openness and determination so that real progress can be booked as soon as possible. The gains of the past 2 decennia, in particular with regards to human rights and women's empowerment, cannot be lost in the resulting agreement. We urge all sides to guarantee meaningful participation of women in the negotiations. In that regard, we were honored to take part in the side event of the Geneva Conference on Afghanistan, organized yesterday by UN Women. Belgium is a proud member of the Group of Friends of Women in Afghanistan and contributed €2 million to UN Women in support of the women, peace and security agenda in Afghanistan. We will not accept turning back the clock. Our support will be conditional upon continued commitment to promoting and protecting the rights of women and girls. We have said this many times, but Belgium remains particularly concerned about the enormous toll the conflict in Afghanistan has on the country's most vulnerable, its children. Child protection should be at the center of the peace talks, including confidence-building measures such as the release of children from detention and rehabilitation programs for children associated with armed groups. The newly adopted UN practical guidance for mediators to protect children in situations of armed conflict offer a powerful tool in this regard. Furthermore, child protection activities and capacity of UNAMA should continue to be prioritized. Violence must be reduced. We call on all parties, and in particular the Taliban, to take immediate steps towards a permanent and comprehensive reduction in violence. A humanitarian ceasefire will build confidence for the peace negotiations and provide much-needed relief for the Afghan people. I reiterate our position regarding the sanctions for the Taliban. Delisting members from the 1988 regime depends on the conditions of Resolution 2513, including the start on intra-Afghan negotiations and the reduction of violence. You cannot sit at a table of peace talks and simultaneously carry out attacks. This is unacceptable. We also specifically condemn recent attacks against education centers, human rights defenders, and journalists, and call for the perpetrators to be promptly brought to justice. I underline the importance of the fight against impunity and the need for transitional justice in Afghanistan. We welcome UNAMA's work on victim-centered justice. In conclusion, I want to reiterate Belgium's strong commitment to accompany the Afghan people on their path towards prosperity and peace. Our support is based on a comprehensive approach, combining defense, diplomatic, and development efforts. Since 2015, we have contributed around $60 million to the Afghan National Army Trust Fund, and this year we plan to finance the acquisition of vaccines and medical equipment for a total of $8.4 million. Together with our partners in the European Union, we will participate in the Geneva Conference with a view to supporting the country's future based on clear conditions with regard to transparency, good governance, the fight against corruption, and gender equality. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is Russian Federation Deputy Permanent Representative, Ms. Anna Yevstigneyeva. Please.
Mr. President, we welcome the President of the Republic of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, and Foreign Minister of the Republic of Afghanistan, Hanif Atmar. We also thank SRSG and head of UNAMA, Ms. Deborah Lyons, Ms. Fatima Gailani, member of the Afghan negotiating team, and Laurel Miller, Asia Director of International Crisis Group, for their respective briefings. Afghanistan is now at a critical juncture, and the key issue is the peace process. The Security Council pays closer attention to the situation in the country and consistently expresses its support to Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process. Indeed, the start of the Afghan peace negotiations in September in Doha was a remarkable step forward in the efforts to bring to an end the protracted conflict and to pave the way to peaceful, united, independent, and prosperous Afghanistan free of terrorism and drug crime. This achievement was fully welcomed by the international community, including the Security Council. This momentum gave all of us hope that it would open the new, brighter chapter in the history of Afghanistan. There is no doubt that this peace process should remain inclusive. We fully share the aspiration of the Afghan people to have a future where all fundamental rights and freedoms, including those of women, are preserved, protected, and built upon. However, we see some hurdles in reaching this goal. Many issues are still jeopardizing fragile peace. We strongly encourage all parties to conflict to put aside their differences and move on to substantive talks. Ongoing violence remains a source of our major concern. Cowardly terrorist attacks became a regular practice in the country. As a result, we received heartbreaking figures of the civilian casualties, among which are women, children, students, religious minorities, medical workers, and many others. Terrorist activities, including those of ISIL, take place amid loud declarations of a significant reduction of presence of foreign troops. Drug production, cultivation, trade and trafficking remain source of support for terrorism and still pose a serious threat for the country, as well as for the region and the whole world. Mr. President, Russia remains committed to facilitating peace process. We have repeatedly stressed that success of the inclusive future political settlement must be based on acceptable to all solution. In this spirit, we continue to work with both Afghan sides. We welcome all other regional and international efforts aimed at promoting peace negotiations. We are convinced that UN should continue to play its critical role in supporting peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan. We recognize the work UNAMA is doing, along with the steps taken by its head, Mr. Bar-Alliance, in this regard. Afghanistan urgently needs sustainable, comprehensive, and real assistance of all regional and international players, including the UN. Unanimous support of the Security Council and its readiness to speak with one voice will also remain vital. But let me be clear, this support shouldn't be used as a bargain or a manipulation. There shouldn't be any attempt to dictate the will to the Afghan people. Afghanistan should not become an arena for competition, but rather a unifying platform for cooperation of all actors, working together to bring peace, stability, and sustainable development to the country. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is St. Vincent and the Grenadines Deputy Permanent Representative, Dr. Halima Teshong, please.
Thank you, Excellency. And at the outset, I would like to extend our heartfelt appreciation to the permanent missions of Estonia, Germany, Indonesia, Afghanistan, Finland, Norway, and Qatar for organizing this high-level virtual area formula meeting. We welcome the participation of President Ghani, distinguished foreign ministers, and the esteemed panelists. Today's discussion is timely, and as we consider the recent developments in the peace process, St. Vincent and the Grenadines extends its solidarity to the government and people of Afghanistan. At this critical juncture, it is imperative that the international community and the United Nations enhance support for all efforts to build peace, stability, unity, and prosperity in Afghanistan. In this regard, we reiterate our support for an inclusive Afghan-led, Afghan-owned peace and reconciliation process with the full and active participation of women. This is the only way to ensure a harmonious and dignified future for all Afghans in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Violence and civilian casualties remain at alarmingly high levels. St. Vincent and the Grenadines remains particularly concerned by the debilitating targeting of civilians. We condemn in the strongest terms intentional attacks on civilians, and civilian infrastructure, and we call upon the Afghan government to ensure that perpetrators of such attacks are brought to justice. We join other delegations in expressing condolences to the families of the victims of the terrorist attack at Kabul University. We also reiterate the Secretary General's call for a ceasefire to enable favorable conditions on the ground. The reduction of violence remains an essential foundation to address underlying political issues and the root causes of the conflict, including transitional justice and women's meaningful and equal participation in all aspects of society. We commend the Afghan government for its continued efforts to enhance domestic laws and policies to address the needs and aspirations of its people. In this connection, we welcome the new draft Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework for 2021 to 2025, which will hopefully lead to more flexible support to the budget matched by increased accountability and improved performance. Turning to the upcoming 2020 Afghanistan Conference in Geneva, we anticipate that this conference will effectively promote sustainable development and peace in Afghanistan. With regard to the level of aid, there is need for donors to pledge predictable and flexible funding for the country. Afghanistan remains plagued by many deep-rooted challenges, including its long history of conflict and the multidimensional hazards of climate change, COVID-19, forced displacement, and underdevelopment. We call on the international community to pledge unprecedented support to help Afghanistan address these challenges and to achieve its goal for a peaceful, prosperous, and self-reliant future. In conclusion, we call on the international community, particularly the United Nations, to continue its engagement with national, regional, and international stakeholders in support of a reduction in violence, a ceasefire, and intra-Afghan negotiations. We also reiterate our support for the Afghan people's quest for peace and stability. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Acting Deputy Permanent Representative, Mr. James Roscoe, please.
Many thanks, Your Excellency, and I would like to start by thanking you, His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Qatar, and Their Excellencies, the Foreign Ministers of Afghanistan, Finland, Norway and Indonesia, and Germany for organising this event. I'd also like to thank His Excellency President Ghani for his keynote address and the other briefers for their remarks. Your Excellencies, we are at an historic moment in Afghanistan. The start of the Afghan peace talks marks an unprecedented opportunity to end decades of war and to build a peaceful future for all Afghans. Achieving these goals is not easy. Violence continues to take the lives of innocent Afghans, and this is unacceptable. Peace will mean taking difficult decisions. President Ghani and his government have taken many courageous steps to reach this point, and the next phase will require more difficult decisions and more courage still. Your Excellencies, these decisions are for Afghans to take. It is our role to support these efforts. First, we should support the peace negotiations. We should remain ready to provide our assistance to the Afghan-led and Afghan-owned process. And I reiterate here the UK's standing offer of assistance and thank the United Nations, as well as the United States, Qatar, Germany, Norway, Indonesia, and Uzbekistan for the excellent work they too are doing. It also involves delivering clear messages to the parties. If the Taliban is serious about peace, the violence must end. Civilians must be able to live in peace. Second, we should support the aspirations of all Afghans, including minority communities, and especially Afghan women, who are justifiably apprehensive about their future. As co-chairs of the Group of Friends of Women in Afghanistan, the UK welcomes Ms. Galani's presence with us here today. We will continue to advocate for women's participation at every level and at every stage of the peace process. Third, we should renew our practical support. The UK is sustaining Afghanistan's security, recently pledging up to over $90 million to the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces for the next year. We are responding to Afghanistan's humanitarian needs, contributing over $75 million this year. And at this month's pledging conference in Geneva, we will announce our ongoing commitment to Afghanistan's development. We urge partners here to join us in matching words with deeds. Your Excellencies, we face a marathon, not a sprint. We must remain patient, firm, and committed. For the UK, we will play our part. Many thanks, Your Excellency.
Thank you. And the next speaker is South Africa First Secretary, Ms. Harshana Golab, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me to begin by thanking Their Excellencies, the Foreign Ministers of Afghanistan, Estonia, Finland, Germany, Indonesia, Ireland, Norway, and Qatar for their participation in this meeting. I would also like to especially thank His Excellency Mohammad Ghani, Ashraf Ghani, and the panelists for their interventions. South Africa is fully supportive of the continuing efforts of the Afghan government and people towards achieving long-term peace and security and prosperity in Afghanistan. The convening of the Afghanistan peace negotiations is a necessary and positive step in achieving this goal. In order to further this important goal of a stable and peaceful Afghanistan, all parties must make every effort to stop the violence that has plagued the country. During this crucial period of time, in the midst of the Afghanistan peace negotiations, South Africa urges all parties to commit to a ceasefire that will create an environment conducive to fruitful negotiations. In order for any progress in the peace process to be made and maintained, hostilities must come to an end. In this regard, we urge all parties to the peace negotiations to actively participate in the discussions in good faith with the aim of ensuring a better life for all Afghans. Another step towards a permanent peace is ensuring that those who are responsible for and committing or conducting grave violations should be brought to justice and held accountable for their actions. South Africa therefore calls on the parties to comply with their obligations under international human rights law as well as international humanitarian law. Additionally, ensuring that these peace negotiations are inclusive and represent all aspects of Afghan society is equally important. Women have, for many years, played an active and crucial role in the Afghan peace process. This must continue and be further encouraged. It is the voices of those who were previously silenced that should now speak the loudest to ensure that their needs, rights, and choices are respected and heard. A crucial part of the inter-Afghan dialogue must be to ensure that the vast gains made in women's and girls' rights are protected. Sustainable peace will only be achieved if women know that they will never again be subjected to deprivation of their fundamental and essential rights. The participation of women in all levels of the peace process will ensure this. It is our duty as members of the international community to strongly advocate for the equal participation and full involvement of women in the processes in the maintenance and promotion of peace and security. In conclusion, South Africa would like to extend its appreciation to the United Nations and Special Representative Lyons and her office for the important work that they continue to do in challenging circumstances. Their steadfast support, continued engagement with national, regional, and international stakeholders in seeking an end to the violence, their work in support of a ceasefire, in promoting the inter-Afghan negotiations, and encouraging confidence-building measures are a necessary and significant component to bringing long-term peace, security, and prosperity to Afghanistan and its people. I thank you.
Thank you to all current members of the Security Council. We have heard the statements by the current UN Security Council member states, and now we'll proceed with statements from incoming members of the United Nations Security Council. And first I will give the floor to Ireland Minister for Foreign Affairs and for Defence, Mr. Simon Coveney, please.
Thank you very much, Ermas. And I'd like to thank President Ghani and previous speakers for the opportunity to address this important meeting on Afghanistan from an Irish perspective. The Afghan people have endured decades of violence, but the start of peace negotiations has provided hope for a better future. Making peace takes courage and takes time. We know from our own experience of overcoming conflict that the path to peace can be long and complex. I urge all the participants engaged in the peace process to stay the course and to substantively engage in negotiations. The UN and the international community supports Afghanistan in all efforts to build sustainable peace, as evidenced in the adoption of Resolution 2513 by the Security Council earlier this year. Together with our EU partners, Ireland has made clear its approach to the future of Afghanistan. We support an inclusive, Afghan-owned peace process that meaningfully includes women and young people, and that builds on gains made by the Afghan people over the last 2 decades, including respect for human rights, gender equality, and the rights of minorities, the rule of law, and improving inclusive and accountable governance. Ireland is gravely concerned at the increase in violence over recent months in Afghanistan at a time when efforts should be focused on providing humanitarian relief for people across Afghanistan, especially during a pandemic. Attacks against civilians violate international law, and those responsible must be held to account by the international community. I call on all who are genuinely committed to peace to reflect the overwhelming desire of the Afghan people for an end to the violence and to declare an immediate ceasefire. Chairman, the international community, and this Council in particular, has a responsibility to support those working for peace in Afghanistan, and we look forward to participating in the pledging conference in a very real way next week. Ireland was proud to co-found last year with Afghanistan the UN Group of Friends of Peace Processes. As a member of the Council, we will continue to stand in solidarity with and support the people of Afghanistan to build a sustainable peace that lasts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mexico Permanent Representative, Mr. Juan Ramon de la Fuente, please.
First and foremost, Mexico would like to thank the organizers and co-sponsors for convening this area formula meeting, as well as previous speakers with whom we share many concepts. As an incoming member of the Council, Mexico acknowledges and reaffirms that the path and process toward peace must be Afghan-owned and Afghan-led. We commend the people of Afghanistan for their resilience, and we support their efforts and work, especially within the framework of the intra-Afghan talks. We believe that having the parties seated at the negotiating table and creating a platform for the plurality of Afghan voices, there is a sound foundation upon which to build a peaceful and more prosperous Afghanistan. The international community must continue to render cohesive and unwavering support to Afghanistan in its efforts to achieve long-lasting and sustainable peace. We believe to this end that the Security Council should continue its support of the Afghan peace negotiations as an inclusive way to achieve a political settlement that will bring an end to the conflict. The work undergone has been immense and should not be undermined by deadlock in the negotiations. Nevertheless, we must insist on the inclusion of all voices at the table. Mexico expresses its concern for the insufficient representation of women in the talks and reiterates the importance of having a true gender perspective, as well as that of youth and minorities in all decision-making processes. We welcome that today's briefers speaking on and for Afghanistan are all women. Mexico is hopeful that this will be a positive sign for the inclusion of women's and girls' voices in the future of peace talks and the road ahead. Obligations in humanitarian assistance, the protection of civilians, and the respect of human rights must be upheld in the course of the peace talks. Particular heed is to be placed into the reports of some grave violations, including sexual and children violence. The international community cannot accept violence, especially when peace negotiations are in process. It is disturbing that the month after the intra-Afghan negotiations launched saw the highest civilian death toll since September 2019. Mexico unequivocally condemns all attacks on civilians and stresses that any attack deliberately targeting schools and education facilities is not only abominable, but also endangers the prospects of a brighter future for the country. We echo the Secretary General's urgent appeal for a global ceasefire to face the challenging circumstances posed by COVID-19. Mexico recognizes the fundamental work of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan and urges the Security Council to continue to fully support its mandate. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is India Permanent Representative, Mr. Thirumurti, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for organizing this timely discussion under the theme, What can the Security Council do to support the peace process in Afghanistan? Afghanistan today is at a critical juncture. And it is vital for the international community, especially the Security Council, to send the right message to everyone concerned. While our reservations on the ARIA format of meetings of the Security Council is on record, I'm happy to participate in this important meeting on Afghanistan. Allow me at the outset to thank His Excellency the President of Afghanistan and the Foreign Minister of Afghanistan for their important remarks. We deeply appreciate the various positive steps taken by the government of Afghanistan towards peace, security, stability, and development. Even as we meet today, fighting continues in Afghanistan in several areas across the country. Reports are coming in of civilians, including children and women, killed or injured in the violence. Terrorist attacks continue to target innocents and institutions of learning. COVID-19 has hit Afghanistan in the midst of a difficult political transition and an intensifying conflict. Nobody seeks peace more than the Afghan people, upon whom war has been imposed for more than 4 decades. All opportunities towards bringing peace and stability should be welcomed. Inclusive, Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled peace efforts can bring long-term peace and stability. However, we are concerned about the increase in violence and the continuing loss of Afghan lives. It is our view that peace process and violence cannot go hand in hand, and we call for immediate, comprehensive ceasefire. For durable peace in Afghanistan, we have to put an end to terrorist safe havens and sanctuaries operating across the Durand Line. The report of the Analytical Support and Sanctions Monitoring Team under the Al-Qaeda-Daesh Sanctions Committee has also highlighted the presence of foreign fighters in Afghanistan. For violence to end in Afghanistan, these terrorist supply chains must be broken. It is time that the Security Council speaks unequivocally against violence and terrorist forces and acts against terrorist sanctuaries and safe havens. Mr. Chairman, India and Afghanistan are contiguous neighbors. We are connected together by centuries of historical people-to-people and cultural relations. India has stood resolutely behind the government and the people of Afghanistan and has supported the development of Afghanistan. Since 2001, India has committed over $3 billion towards development, reconstruction, and capacity building in Afghanistan. Major projects such as the Afghan-India Friendship Dam in Herat, the Afghan National Parliament building in Kabul, and the electricity supply grid between Kabul and northern Afghanistan stand testimony to the special place that Afghanistan occupies in our priorities. This assistance is besides the over 400 high-impact community development projects that we have implemented in Afghanistan and the more than 150 projects currently underway. Our developmental footprint is today spread across every one of the 34 provinces of Afghanistan. More than 65,000 Afghans have studied in India so far. We also prioritize Afghanistan in providing assistance to combat COVID. India supplied 75,000 metric tons of wheat to Afghanistan recently via the Chabahar port. To tide over the artificial and political obstacles of non-permit of full transit rights to Afghanistan for their products to reach India and Indian products to reach Afghanistan, we operationalized air freight corridors that has seen more than 1,000 flights. It is important for Afghanistan to have access to high seas. It is a testimony to our unwavering resolve to Afghanistan's peace and stability that we have invested both with sweat and blood for the development of Afghanistan. India has sacrificed many lives, including our diplomats, in the call of duty while serving in Afghanistan. Mr. Chairman, the overall objective of our endeavor has been only to bring lasting peace and stability in Afghanistan, as that is critical for the peace and security of the whole region. And for that to happen, the Security Council needs to ensure the following. Firstly, the peace process must be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled. Solutions must come from the Afghans themselves, in line with the wishes and aspirations of all sections of Afghan society. Sovereignty and territorial integrity of Afghanistan must be respected. Secondly, there needs to be zero tolerance of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Afghanistan can succeed only when terrorism is no longer flows across the Durand Line. Terror and violence cannot be instrument to shape Afghanistan's future or dictate the choices Afghans make. It is important to ensure that no one provides sanctuary to terrorists who threaten Afghanistan or any other country in the region. Those who do so must be held accountable. Thirdly, the international community simply cannot afford to lose the gains of the last 2 decades. The progress achieved so far is hard-won. The future which we seek should have a place for every Afghan and should have space for everyone's aspirations. In particular, India is convinced that the rights of women needs to be strongly protected. Gender mainstreaming and safeguards are integral to the future of Afghanistan, and we appreciate the remarks of the President of Afghanistan in this context. The rights of the minorities and the vulnerable need to be safeguarded. Respect for human rights and democracy needs to be ingrained in any framework that a future Afghanistan designs for itself. The recent targeted attacks on ANDSF, universities, women occupying positions of responsibility, and the youth only serve to highlight the concerted efforts by terrorists and their sponsors to erode the gains of the last 2 decades. Fourthly, it is important to ensure that the issue of full transit rights to Afghanistan is not used by states to extract political price from Afghanistan. The international community should discourage medieval mentalities and work towards removal of artificial transit barriers imposed on Afghanistan. It should ensure all transit rights guaranteed to Afghanistan under bilateral and multilateral transit agreements operate without any hindrance. India remains committed to working with the international community towards achieving this shared objective. Mr. Chairman, the situation in Afghanistan is a matter of concern. Restoration of normalcy in Afghanistan through a legitimate democratic process is essential for long-term stability of Afghanistan and the region. We are conscious of the fact that we will be starting our tenure in the Security Council at a critical juncture for Afghanistan. We extend our assurance that India will continue to provide all support to the government and the people of Afghanistan in realizing their aspirations for a peaceful, democratic, and prosperous future, where the interests of all sections of Afghan society are protected. We will continue to support all opportunities that can bring durable peace, security, and stability in the country. I thank you very much.
Thank you to all incoming members of the Security Council. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the last section of our debate today. It's my honor to give the floor back to the representative of Afghanistan and our distinguished briefers for their short comments and replies. Please limit yourself to 5 minutes. And let us start with the permanent representative of Afghanistan to the UN, followed by Ms. Deborah Lyons, Ms. Fatima Gailani and Ms. Laurel Miller. Your Excellency, Ms. Adela Ras, please.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I need to first start with words of gratitude to you, Your Excellency, to Estonia for co-organizing today's event with the co-sponsors, Germany, Indonesia, Norway, Finland, and of course, my colleagues for their hard work. It's an important meeting at a very critical time. As you heard from His Excellency President Ashraf Rani and as well as Minister Atmar, Afghanistan is in the verge of a new chapter in our history. The new Afghanistan where women are in the forefront of the society. The new Afghanistan where youth is making majority of the country. And of course, where violence is still going on, but our optimism and hope is at the highest level. And that is due to the international community support, your support, and of course, the role of the UN, constructively being engaged in Afghanistan in the last 2 decades. I also must express my gratitude to Germany and Indonesia as being an excellent co-pen holders for Afghanistan in the last 2 years, and would like to welcome Estonia and Norway for taking this really important file at the Security Council. My gratitude to Finland for co-hosting the upcoming Geneva conference with UN colleagues in Afghanistan in next 3 days. This is an important meeting, and your commitment, the support of the UN Security Council members, and as well as the new coming members to the Council, India, Ireland, and Mexico today, who spoke, and especially the Foreign Minister of Ireland, I had the pleasure to meet his beautiful country recently. I just wanted to express once again that the women in Afghanistan, the younger generation in Afghanistan, we believe in the new country, the country that stands on new democracy and the pillars of a young democracy, and the future that protects the rights of Afghan women, the future that protects our freedom of expression, the future that protects our political freedom. And this could only continue to proceed if peace process succeeds, and if peace process where the outcome protects the gains of last 2 decades. So thank you once again, Your Excellency, for your generous hospitality of today's hosting the meeting. And thanks once again to the wonderful briefers, to my idol, Ms. Fatima Gilani, who every young Afghan woman looks up to her, to Ms. Lyon, who is doing an excellent work, and there had been a lot of words of congratulation and support to her today at the Council. And of course, to Ms. Miller for her very critical view of the peace process. I thank you, and thanks for this moment to express my words of gratitude in appreciation on behalf of the government of Afghanistan and people of Afghanistan. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you for your kind words and reflection. The next speaker is Ms. Deborah Lyons, please. Please unmute your mic.
Thank you very much, Minister. And thank you to everyone today for a fascinating series of statements of support for Afghanistan and for the work we're doing. Minister, let me begin where all of this started, and that is the question about what we can do together, and in particular what the UN Security Council can do. First, the statement I think that was echoed by everyone, and that is, again, a call for a reduction in the level of violence, and hopefully someday soon an actual ceasefire. But clearly violence is an issue that, again, the UN Security Council can continue to focus on and encourage all of the member countries to call for a reduction in violence in Afghanistan. Secondly, the peace itself and the peace process. There are many ways in which I think we can continue to reinforce the parties to the peace negotiations, to work with the Taliban, to work with the Republic negotiating teams, to help them with the incredible expertise, both technical and substantive, that the UN has gathered over the years in the many peace negotiations that we participated in. So I think we need to be thinking through more how, as we complete the first round of the negotiations, we can look at organizing ourselves as a group of countries and as the United Nations and as UNAMA to further support the two parties as they continue with this critical work over the months to come. Thirdly, I want to say how important it is to hear all of you expressing your commitment to inclusivity, your commitment to human rights, women's rights, minority rights, etc. This echo needs to continue and needs to be amplified. It makes a difference. It gives people hope, and it reinforces the teams at the negotiating table that human rights are not negotiable, cannot be compromised. Next, I just want to comment briefly on a concern that was raised both by President Ghani and a number of countries with regard to the connection between narcotics and terrorism, and say that we are working with the UN Office for Drugs and Crime. It's certainly something that's being done regionally as well to ensure that this is an issue that is being addressed, and I appreciate all of the support of the countries who have a particular interest in this. I also, Minister, want to mention something that did not come up today, and yet it is something that plagues us all over the world, and that is the huge level of people who are seeking sanctuary and safety, refugees, migrants, etc. And Afghanistan stands amongst, I think, a group of people who truly require enormous attention, working with the regional countries to deal with this issue of migration, of refugees and returnees. Regardless of the results of the peace process, this will be a challenge for Afghanistan, for the neighbors, and certainly, I think, for all of us. We benefited greatly in the last few days with the visit of the High Commissioner for Filippo Grandi for UNHCR, and had rich discussions with the Afghan government about this. And certainly I have been working with countries in the region on it. Next, I would just like to comment on security for a moment. This was raised, I think, very effectively by my fellow briefer, Ms. Miller. It is clear, I think, to all of us that the timeline for a security transition will take place most likely before a political or peace negotiation transition. And yet, many of us are calling for a responsible security transition, one that does not leave a vacuum. I think this is an area requiring much more attention. We are working with some of the parties with regard to this now, but it is certainly something that requires much more consideration, and that I'm sure we will want to work with the UN Security Council and others concerning. I'll also just mention briefly the importance of this session today, but also bringing countries together in various formats to address a variety of issues facing the region and facing Afghanistan. And for that, I commend Russia for the work they've done with the Troika and the various countries that they have invited to their sessions, Turkey with the and Afghanistan for the Heart of Asia, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, RECA, many other organizations that have come together to support Afghanistan. This is a particular time when all of these formats need to be further galvanized to help the peace process. And then lastly, Minister, I would again thank you, particularly as the host, and of course, Finland, Qatar, Norway and Indonesia for this incredible session today. As I said in my opening remarks, Afghanistan is a country that has seized world attention for these last 2 decades. This will continue. The world will be watching how Afghanistan moves toward this peaceful landscape it so richly deserves. But the world will also be watching how we as individual member countries and as the United Nations help to support the Afghan people at this momentous time. Thank you again for a fabulous opportunity to share and to hear from so many others. Thank you.
Thank you for your warm words and additional comments. And now, Fatima Gailani, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. I took it very seriously at the beginning that I have to speak only for 7 minutes. Now, let me thank everyone. I thank you, Your Excellency, for this wonderful meeting. And thank you, all of you. Deborah, you have been with us all the time, and thank you all. I am from the generation of peace. I was born, educated, and brought up in the time of peace. I remember Afghanistan at the time of peace. It was a totally different Afghanistan, and I want the generation of Ambassador Adel Aras to enjoy what I had enjoyed when I was a young person, and I want to be in a peaceful country in my retirement, which is very soon. So we have to have peace before that. Yes, people of Afghanistan are tired of war, definitely. Too long. 42 years is too long for any country, for any standard. But they make sure to tell us the message that what do they mean by peace. Every day, at least once a day, we have virtual meetings thanks to technology. We have virtual meetings with all over Afghanistan, with women, with young people, with people who are advocates of human rights or other rights of minorities, and so on. They are all very much for peace, but every sentence finishes, they make it very clear that when they say peace, it doesn't mean just the lack of war. They want all the values, these fantastic values that we have in our constitution and what we have achieved for the last almost 20 years, that it has to be kept. The rights and the universal values that you have been talking about it all along. And I'm grateful that you're aware of it. And it is part of the conditions. But when we talk about peace and we talk about when we go towards peace, yes, there will be difficult things to talk about and solve it eventually. And it is important to know that in our constitution, there is hardly anything that we could not support it with our religion. So that's why human right, women's right, minority right, inclusion of young people is not only that it is a right thing to do, it is an important thing to do, because without it, this peace cannot sustain and cannot continue. Thank you.
And thank you very much indeed. And finally, Ms. Laurel Miller, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This discussion today has focused on peace, on the gains that Afghanistan has achieved, on hope. But I think I will use these closing minutes to say a few words about the war in Afghanistan. The Taliban has made gains on the battlefield over the last several years, and it is positioned to continue to make gains. Under this pressure, the risk of fracture on the Afghan government side, on the republic side, is real. And there are emerging many reports of growing development of militias that reinforce concerns about fracture and the risk of a wider and more chaotic civil war in Afghanistan. I commend the many calls here today for reduction of violence and for ceasefire. But again, as an independent analyst of the situation in Afghanistan, I have to say I'm not particularly optimistic that those calls are going to produce results anytime soon. As the last speaker here today, I'm sorry to be ending on a negative note, but I believe it's important not to lose sight of the realities of the context in Afghanistan. The calls, this situation, these realities, I believe calls for sustaining pressure on all sides not to squander the present opportunity for negotiations. It also calls for greatly stepped up regional diplomatic processes toward that end. And I concur with the points that Deborah Lyons made about the need for multiple diplomatic formats to be supporting and pushing forward the negotiations in Doha. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Dear briefers, thank you all for your personal commitment, and I admire your dedication truly. Looking forward to work closely with all of you. Thank you. We have had an extremely fruitful discussion, and now it is my honor to give the floor to Mr. Heiko Maas, Foreign Minister of Germany, for his concluding remarks. Heiko, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Omas. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, the start of the Afghan peace negotiation in September was really a moment of hope. And a special thanks to our friends from Qatar for their tremendous efforts in the last months. Really great job. But we all know that the way forward will be very difficult, and it is. Today, as you all stated, we see positive developments, but also serious difficulties. Moving ahead, I conclude from our discussion that the following points will be key. Afghanistan needs a ceasefire. The endless and excessive violence has to stop. The Afghan government and the Taliban should step up their negotiation efforts irrespective of external factors. There is no time to lose. The international community needs to be steadfast in supporting Afghanistan. And the withdrawal of international troops must remain condition-based. Progress in the peace process and the security situation on the ground are the essential factors. This has always been the consensus among allies in our support to the Afghan security forces. Our goal remains a peace settlement that preserves the fundamental achievements of the last 19 years and of Afghanistan constitutional order. Like the Afghan people, we want an Afghanistan where all communities live in peace, where human rights and fundamental freedoms are respected and protected, and from where no threats to other countries evolve. And Germany will continue its long-standing assistance to Afghanistan and the peace process. Next week, we will reaffirm our support at the 2020 Afghanistan Conference in Geneva. We will garner broader backing for the peace process in the International Peace Support Group, which we hope to launch very soon. And we will also continue working with our partners from Norway, Qatar, Uzbekistan, and Indonesia. And we will ensure a proper handover of our co-pen holdership of the Afghanistan dossier to our Security Council successors. Ladies and gentlemen, only Afghans can decide their future, but the international community and the Security Council in particular need to support them. Together, we have gone a long way down the road to peace, and it is on this road we should continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heiko. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our discussion today. We have taken note of several concrete proposals to support the peace process in Afghanistan. I sincerely thank our distinguished speakers, as well as the current and incoming Security Council members, for their valuable statements and participations. I would like to thank you all and wish you all good health over the globe. Thank you.